This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to From Guilt to Good, Self-Care Solutions for Busy Caregivers, the podcast rewriting the narrative of self-care. If you're a caregiver feeling stretched thin, torn between responsibilities and longing for self-care, you are in the right place. I'm Jeanette Yates, a fellow caregiver and someone who spent years doing all the self-care things and never really feeling any better. After years of research, trial and error, and self-exploration, I finally found a way to do sustainable self-care in a way that made me feel good and not guilty. In From Guilt to Good, we'll explore how you can do that too. Together, we'll hear expert insights, actionable steps, and heartfelt stories to guide you toward rediscovering your worth, reclaiming your health, and getting back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. Okay, you guys, you are in for a treat today. I met Erin online, as we do these days, on Instagram, and I was immediately drawn to her because she is saying some of the same things to her audience and to her community as I am saying to you. She is a fellow self-care coach for caregivers. Her name is Erin Antroinen, and she is the passionate owner and CEO of Next Gen Caregivers. Her journey into caregiving was unique, as they all are. She simultaneously started caring for her father battling cancer and her mother facing dementia and Parkinson's. So that was a lot all at once, but we can relate, right? Erin is your guide to a personalized caregiving approach, and she recognizes that each caregiver's journey is unique and what they need is unique. And she is here to support caregivers at every stage, from newbies seeking logistics and stress management tips to seasoned caregivers looking for more somatic awareness tools. So we talk about that a little bit in the interview today. She also offers emotional support and people who want to stop just surviving their caregiving journey, but really want to thrive and be connected within it and beyond it. So I love chatting with Erin. She and I work closely together and are big encouragers of each other. She's been an encouragement to me as I've started my own ways to help caregivers as well. She really believes that caregiving is demanding. We all believe that, but she also likes to highlight and focus on the opportunities that it gives us for really developing personally and having fulfilling lives. So this is a great conversation. I loved it. She'll probably be on the podcast again if I have anything to say about it. Let's welcome Erin. Hey, Erin, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you here.
I know. I'm so excited. This is so good.
I know. It's been a long time coming. So I invited you on here for a couple different reasons. One, you, like me, are a self-care coach for caregivers. We both, we're in lockstep when it comes to wanting to help caregivers with their self-care. And I remember talking to you one time, and you were talking about like why you felt the need to create this specific type of coaching for caregivers. Can you tell me a little bit about like what made you want to start this particular like self-care focus for caregivers?
Yeah, I was really, especially after coming out of being a caregiver. So my mom actually just passed away 1 year ago. This Sunday actually will be the March 17th, will be the 1 year anniversary of her passing. And so I remember being in it and coming out, and, when I was in it, I had a lot of, help that I was getting through different business coaches and different stuff, but I didn't see a lot of that stuff in the caregiving space of teaching you how to actually care for yourself. How do you navigate this heaviness of the duality of literally becoming the parent to your parent, while also holding your career and your life and building a social life. And for me, like, dating. I'm not married yet. I don't have children yet. And so, being able to figure out how to hold it all. And so, and what really made me passionate was just the fact of my own burnout story. And I just reading the statistics and seeing everything on the internet of how many caregivers are struggling with burnout, are getting their own diagnoses, or God forbid, even passing away because they are sacrificing so much of themselves, like literally to death for their loved one. And I was like, there has to be another way to be able to not only survive in caregiving, but to be able to thrive in caregiving.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And, you and I both had like a burnout. We have our own burnout stories, and we came out of it, and now we're trying to help other caregivers too. Yeah. Another space, like you said, another area, or another reason it's so important to have coaches that are focusing on the caregiver self-care is there are a lot of support groups, a lot of accounts, a lot of Facebook groups out there that, are for caregivers.
Yeah.
But they're focused on, that like logistics or like, just in general caregiving. Mm-hmm. And I really felt like there was a space, and I think you feel the same way, a space where it's like, okay, you're telling me to take care of myself.
Yeah.
But how am I supposed to do that?
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it. And then as someone like me who I was practicing self-care strategies, like I was doing the things, I'm a former fitness instructor, blah, 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 but it wasn't working. So what was the problem? And of course, we'll get into a little bit about like why it wasn't working later. But, for me, it was creating a space where the caregiver could come and focus on their own care, not caregiving for someone else, which is even hard to say to some caregivers, like, why don't you come focus on yourself? Like, is that even allowed? Are we allowed to do that as caregivers? So anyway, before we dive deeper into self-care in general, I would love for you to share a little bit of your caregiving journey, whatever you feel comfortable with. I know this is a kind of a hard time, so I want to respect that for you, but then also tell us about, your burnout. What happened? What happened, girl?
Give us the juice. How'd you end up in the ER? So I've actually been a caregiver for 11 plus years. So it started way back in 2011, or 2012. My dad was diagnosed with cancer. So at the time, my mom was his primary caretaker, but I was kind of secondary. So he had a lot of surgeries. The cancer kept coming back. He was in the hospital a lot. So she actually at the time was the manager. I was in direct sales. And so she was my office manager. So when she was not in the office, we just took the office to the hospital. And we sat in the waiting room and did what we had to do, and just, supported her and helping her to figure out doctor's appointments and just stuff like that throughout the years while navigating my own life in my 30s. And everything took a dramatic shift, though, probably 2017, 2018. I was in the middle of my own nervous system crisis. I had a black mold issue that took my nervous system out, and I was down for like a year. I couldn't really drive. I wasn't steady enough to walk on my own. I had a cane, and I was coming from like powerlifting. I was like powerlifting 400 pounds. I was squatting like 400 pounds to like literally going to needing a cane to be able to walk. And so I got about 70% better when my dad came home on hospice. It was just this it was in the middle of COVID. We just thought maybe he had COVID, maybe he had the flu. And it turns out that everything between his brain and his eyes, because his cancer was in his face and between his lymph nodes and his eyes. And it just kept coming back. And it just finally got to the point where it was all necrosis or cancer. And so they sent him home on hospice. And that very same week, we got my mom's diagnosis of frontal temporal lobe dementia and Parkinson's. And so
wow,
I remember being on the phone with a girlfriend, being like, I don't even know how I can handle this. Like, I mean, because essentially they're sending my dad home to die. And essentially, and also my mom just got a diagnosis of death too, even though it's going to be, I don't know what
it's a dire diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's progressive. There's no saving, So, so that was kind of the beginning of kind of really hardcore caregiving for me.
Yeah. And as you're talking about this, I mean, I've heard your story before, but I think I forgot how kind of like stacked up everything was. Mm-hmm. And it occurs to me, this is something that I think plays into the burnout too. So mm-hmm. I think it's relevant to bring up here, but, everyone's talking about that as like, oh, that's so stressful. That must have been hard. That's very emotional. But also what is happening to you, I would imagine, is a trauma experience.
Oh,
so like it's not just like, oh, this was a crappy
mm-hmm.
time, but like your body is now going, experiencing, your body and mind are experiencing trauma.
Yeah.
And we're expected to just, as caregivers, I think we often kind of whitewash or don't really think about how traumatic
mm-hmm.
the many facets are, many facets of caregiving are, but especially that like your world changes, everything changes. You've already dealt with something traumatic with your own health. And now there's these other elements. I think we're really missing a lot there when we're not attending to our own trauma
mm-hmm.
as caregivers.
Yeah.
And so I think that plays a huge part in burnout. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a huge part. So this, like, if you look up the difference between like big T trauma, little T trauma, and complex mm-hmm. trauma, like big T trauma is going to be like, somebody dying or almost dying. So for me, having my dad dying and then my mom almost dying, and then 60 days from the time that my dad died, my mom had 2 major falls under my care. One, right. She fell and she broke her back, and the second, she fell and she had a brain bleed, and both of them got rushed to the hospital. The back breaking, I was able to be with her in the hospital, but the brain bleed, she got flown out to another hospital. This woman cannot advocate for herself. She cannot mm-hmm. speak. She cannot like tell you. I could not be there physically with her. It was literally like losing my dad, then almost like being traumatized of losing my mom, and then almost losing her 2 more times, all within a 90-day period. Mm-hmm. And then, if you then go back and look at what small T traumas are like, this is what I call like death by 1,000 cuts. This is all the little things, like the nuances of caregiving, the advocacy, all of the things that cause stress. This is the mental load, and then complex traumas when you got all these multiple things building up, and that stress in the body it has to go somewhere. I always use the analogy of like, if we're just pushing it down and pushing it down and pushing it down, like we just sweep it under the rug, and eventually it's going to poof out from underneath of the rug, and it's not going to just get on you. It's going to get on everything around you. Yes. We can't, at that point, we're just sitting there, and like the littlest thing makes us start having a panic attack, or we start crying, or we start having heart palpitations, and we're like, why are we so stressed? It's like, I wonder why.
Right, you're like, I'm just sitting in some traffic. Why am I about to, pass out? And it's like, well, because, all this stuff, and I was actually really relieved when I learned about complex trauma mm-hmm. In my own healing journey, because people kept talking about, oh, I have PTSD from being a caregiver. And I'm like, well, I'm still a caregiver.
Yeah.
And I'm still experiencing all of those things every day. Like, it's not over. Yeah. And, my mom has had sepsis more times than I can count, has been on a ventilator, has, mm-hmm. been rushed to the hospital. Yeah. I tell everybody, in the last 6 years, it's over 40 times in the last 6 years she's been in the hospital. Yeah. Like, that is a repeated trauma, that is, whether you want to call it death by the little T trauma or like lots of big T trauma, like, I don't know, because it felt like both, but that is something, it's like, no wonder I burned out, because mm-hmm. I was, my mom was almost dying or could be dying for most of my life, And so I think, for me, when I heard about complex trauma, it was almost like a way for me to breathe a little bit and go, okay, so this is what's going on now. I can work to heal from some of this. But so you're dealing with all of this, you're having all of these experiences, and then talk to me a little bit about when the burnout, when did this stuff come out from under the rug for you?
Yeah. It's funny. I'm always been an achiever, right? I'm always like, you give me a challenge, I'm going to crush it. Like I'm a type A person, like I get it done. And it took about 6 months from all of this happening. And my mom had come back from the hospital. And when she came back, I had to fight she was not well enough. I had to fight to get her readmitted to the hospital, to go to skilled nursing. And so it wasn't until about 6 months after I started waking up having heart palpitations in the middle of the night. And I was not sleeping and everything was making me anxious. And so I went to the doctors just to kind of get my blood work done, make sure that everything was looking good. And she called me and she was like, Erin, you need to get to the ER immediately. Like your blood work is showing signs of a heart attack or a possible lung clot. And so you need to get there right away. She said, we'll call ahead. You'll get priority. And scariest day of my life because there was nobody that could go with me. We were in the middle of COVID. And when you have to advocate for yourself, especially when it comes to lung clots and all of this stuff, it was so scary. But the good thing is that it ended up just being a panic attack, but it was a huge awakening to me that there's something really wrong here with me and that I literally will not survive. People say that people die of a broken heart. This to me felt exactly like what that could potentially feel like. And I was like, if I don't do something, I might not be here to be able to take care of my mom.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. That sounds extremely scary, but I appreciate that you were willing to talk about that because I think the word burnout gets thrown around so often and sometimes equated with just being really tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
And frustrated, oh, I'm just burnout. I just need a break, blah, blah, blah. And while, yes, most caregivers do need a break, that's not going to solve the problem. Yeah. Because if you still go back to the same situation, the same strategies or lack of strategies and boundaries, et cetera, if you haven't addressed the root problem, then the burnout's going to come back and it may come back even worse. Especially, I know for some people, they're like, well, I just had a break. I can't take another one. It's and so
I think I'm so glad you said that, Jeanette, because I think a lot of people don't realize that self-care is not just respite.
Right.
It's learning how, I just did this fun analogy on my social media the other day with the 2 things of water. And when your capacity of your nervous system is overflowing, water just keeps flowing out of this cup. We can't go sometimes take a break, but we can increase our capacity, which is increasing the size of our cup, which is increasing our nervous system. It's such a common, doctors and social workers will be like, you just need, or even people, your friends and family will be like, well, can you take time off? Can you have some respite? And that's not always an option. And so, then caregivers feel trapped. They don't have an option to really care for themselves. And they look at these big mountaintop experiences, like getting their nails done or going for a massage or doing these things as self-care. And it's no, it's actually drinking enough water in the day. It's actually eating nutritious food and not crap and actually giving your body good solid building blocks to work off of. That is really self-care.
I don't want to do that. I just want to go get my nails done, Erin.
I mean, I hear you, sister. Me too. Literally, I had to do so because this is the ego, right? Your ego will try to tell you that I tried to fit caregiving into the cracks of my life and try to be the same person I was, whereas actually I needed to change the expectation of what a successful life now looks like, what it feels like, what does my life now just because I may not be able to go get my nails done or do what I used to do doesn't mean that I can't have a joyful, loving, fulfilled life. I need to figure out what that actually looks like instead of feeling trapped in what my life now feels like.
Right. Agreed. And I think too, when we're talking about, yes, please. I'm really not knocking going to get your nails done. I go get my nails done. I love massages, but yes, we totally advocate. Yes, please. If somebody offers to take care of some caregiving stuff for you, so you can go do that, please say yes. Please go.
Yeah.
But it is in the day-to-day tending to yourself. I almost have, like, obviously I'm going to still use self-care to talk about it, but like I tend to talk about it as tending to yourself as if you would a garden, which I'm not even a gardener, but I know from being raised in the South and having grandmas in the garden all the time, how much tenderness and care and consistency you have to have on a daily basis so that you get those beautiful, the beautiful fruit or the beautiful vegetables, right? Or the flowers. Like you have to tend to it regularly. Water, sunshine, food, like these are the things that plants need and us. And when we can experience joy, even in the tending to ourselves in that way, it increases our capacity to see joy everywhere else. Now, I do want you to dive a little bit deeper because I saw that story, girl. I saw that reel with the capacity, and I talk about capacity and with in my stuff as well. And I talk about it in terms of capacity, like what is your capacity for caregiving? Like how much can you do? So we do an evaluation and an assessment of, where are you at capacity? Could you do more caregiving? What if your capacity changes? What if your loved one's needs change? So that's how I talk about capacity. But when you're talking about capacity in that analogy, you're talking about nervous system capacity. So I wonder if you can break that open just a little bit more for us, because I love some nervous system conversation. So let's go into that a little bit more.
Yeah. So I learned so much through I tell you, one of the greatest gifts of my life was my mold sickness, because it really taught me, because it attacked my nervous system, and I would not have understood nervous system capacity and all of that stuff. And so, we all have a certain level of capacity in our nervous system, and what that means in terms of like what we can do from things coming in from, what you're doing with your kids, in terms of spoon. If you've ever heard of spoon theory, this is what so many people, you have so many spoons of what your body's able to do, what your mind is able to do on a day-to-day basis. And for someone who's not caregiving, let's say they have like 14 spoons. And so they're able to just keep dishing things out and doing stuff. They're handling their day with ease. Whereas a caregiver, when they wake up, they might only have 8 spoons to begin the day with. And then and it takes them 2 spoons to get ready, whereas it only may take somebody 1 spoon to get ready. Right. And so when we have all this stress built up in our nervous system, everything feels harder. Decisions feel harder. Like we can't make up our mind about things. We stop trusting ourselves because we feel like we've messed up before. And what if I mess up again? Or like, is this the right decision? I don't know. And so there's this, you're either kind of in this place where you're hyper activated, where you're like hyper vigilant, you're looking around, you're always looking for a threat, right? And this was very early on when mom fell, like I was always looking for a threat. I was always on. And so my nervous system, almost like if you pay attention, it almost buzzes in your body. And it's this like, it's like electricity. You can feel the electricity in your body, and you know that you're not grounded, you're not centered, you're not all of those things. And you got to like bring yourself down. And, or you could be hypo, where you're on the opposite side, where the fatigue and the lethargicness is like taking over, and you've got to find a way to like ramp your capacity back up, which is just, when I say ramp your capacity up, all I mean is nourish your nervous system. Take care of your nervous system. What are those things that are
not be able to do all the things you think you should be doing, but when you do the things, you're able to do them. You have more capacity to do the things that you are able to do. I think that is so important. I love the idea of nourishing the nervous system. I just was doing a training earlier today that talked about like hydration, and we all know it's important, but they were talking about like there's actual fascia that connects like your vagus nerve from the top of your your brainstem all the way down, and it's all connected. And if it gets dehydrated, it basically is ruinous to you. So it's like, this isn't just about like not being thirsty. This is
Well, and your vagus nerve is the only nerve that touches almost every organ in your body,
right?
Which is what's responsible. And so constantly, so I don't know if you know this, but 20% of the signals are going from your brain to your body in the vagus nerve, but 80% are going from your body to your brain. And so what that means is if like you're doing all this head stuff and this mindset stuff to like get through caregiving, that's awesome. But you're only attacking the neck up stuff. We have to address the bottom up, the bottom down, the neck down, which is the body, which is where this holds a lot of our stress. Like if you sit here and you just intentionally relax your shoulders, you didn't even realize you were holding your shoulders up.
Right.
If you untense your thighs, you're like, oh, I didn't even realize that I was like sitting here with the death grip, but because we just hold all of our tension in our body.
Right. We, a lot of times when I'm working with caregivers, I just talk about mindfulness of breath and how like, we all know that we're breathing, but do we? And so like when you actually pay attention to your breath, you realize how shallow, how little you're breathing. And you don't, and like I, do work where it's like, don't try to change your breath right now. Just notice it. Just actually pay attention to it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And then like you say, I notice my breath not only in my belly, but I also notice it in my shoulders. I feel it in my chest, like all the different places. And so just becoming more aware, like you were saying, I'm nodding my head when you're talking about the nervous system literally like buzzing. And I'm nodding my head because I know what it's like. But so many people have spent so many caregivers have spent so long not paying attention that they can't feel any of it. And so a few weeks ago, I interviewed a friend of mine who talked about how when your body is telling you what it needs, but if you're not listening, it gets harder to hear what it's saying, and then that's when the rug gets the stuff under the rug comes out, because it's like, okay, you're not listening these other ways, so the panic attack is going to happen, or the autoimmune illness is going to come, or something like that. And so I think it's being able to feel what's going on in our body so that we can attend to what it's telling us is so important. Yeah. So when you were, you experienced this burnout situation, you realized that something needed to change. How did you start doing that? Because you still had someone to care for. You still had a job. You still had all of these things going on. How did you start making, I'm assuming you made small shifts and didn't change everything at once. How did you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So really, I started being super intentional whenever I woke up, whether it was 3 a.m. or whether it was 6 a.m. And before my feet hit the floor, I would like speak out loud, or I eventually put one piece of paper that was next to my bed. And it was just like, it said, what is the one thing that I'm going to do to focus on me today? And it could have been drinking water. It could have been eating 3 square nutritious meals. And then at the end of the day, I reflected back and I said, how did I take care of myself today? Because I needed to give my brain evidence that I was actually following through and that I could, because I think what happens is we tell ourselves this lie that we don't have time and that we don't, and what happens is we guilt ourselves into doing all of these things that, like, yes, they need to get done, but like you taking 20 minutes for yourself is not going to stop the towels from being folded or the dinner from being made or the like whatever, like it's still going to happen. And so that was number one. The second thing I did was I created reminders all around my house, because especially when stress starts happening, you're not in your conscious mind, and so I put sticky notes all around the house. So I started habit stacking my breathing techniques, like with my mom. So when she was brushing her teeth, I was doing box breathing. When we were getting ready for bed, I would make sure I'm breathing into my belly and then exhaling out all the way. Just little things that and I would put these little reminders, and sometimes she would do it with me. Sometimes I would do it by myself. I tried to engage my mom in as much as she would participate in, because the thing is like, it will help her too. Like I think that our loved ones, we discount them, especially if they have dementia or Alzheimer's. Like I talk to so many caregivers that are like so frustrated by the behaviors and the things. And I'm like, can you imagine like all of a sudden not knowing your brain, your body, your environment, and like coming in and out of consciousness with that? And like, they have a brain situation that they can't control, Right. And so it's up to us now. And that sucks that it's up to us. Like it sucks that we have to carry the mental load, the physical load, the emotional load, like it sucks. Like I'm not even going to sit here and act like it's okay. Like it sucks. And also we get to choose our perspective and extend grace and have patience and it's hard some days. I'm not going to act like it's easy because there's some days where I was screaming at my mom, Yeah. And also when I figured out how to do these techniques, I realized my anger was about me, not about her.
Right. Or it's about the situation. Like it's. Well,
it was about the emotion that I was feeling, not about me. It was about the emotion. And I needed to give myself permission to feel that emotion. I think sometimes in society, like we're taught like not to be angry or not to like be bitter or not to be jealous. Like these are bad feelings and emotions just are. I think sometimes we like label them as good and bad and they aren't good and bad. They just are. And I think when we can give ourselves permission and space to be like, I'm angry. Like I want to go scream in a pillow, go scream in a pillow.
Please do. Yes.
Please do. Like, go and you so yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you said that because first of all, thank you for saying that you screamed at your mom because because first of all, that's real. I can't tell you every time somebody's like, oh, Jeanette, you're a saint for taking care of your mom for the past 40 years. I'm like, first of all,
one person said that to me one more time.
I appreciate that. It has been, quite a journey. It hasn't always been like it is right now for 40 years. I was 8 when she was diagnosed. So it's, it was different, counting her pills for her and helping her walk back and forth to the car was, different than it was in the last 10 years, certainly. But, also I'm human. I had my own baggage from childhood. Some of it was due to growing up with a mom who was chronically ill. That wasn't always the greatest situation. So she has her own childhood trauma that she's dealing with or not dealing with. So there have been plenty of times that you scream your head off at your loved one that is like, and then I used to beat myself up for that. She used to, it was awful. And then I remember probably the last time it happened. Well, no, not the last time. The second to the last time it happened. I remember she's yelling, I'm yelling. She still lived at home then. I say, she's like, and I'm like, Rrr. I leave, I slam the door and I get halfway down the driveway and I'm like, what are you going to not come over anymore? What are you going to not show up? This is not a sustainable, so I took a minute. I did some breathing, did some meditation. And then I walked back in there and I said, well, that didn't really go we've got to move on from that. So, and we just kind of were like, okay, that it almost was like, okay, that felt really good, but clearly, she didn't mean for me to leave and never come back. Clearly I didn't mean I'm leaving and never coming back.
Yeah.
Yes, we both said those things or whatever. I don't even remember what, but we said it, it's over. We, apologize. And then we move on because we're not going to not care for each other in whatever way we can, you know? Yeah. And so I think it's important though, to acknowledge that because some people are like, oh, I just yelled at my parent. I'm the worst caregiver ever. And it's like, no, you're human.
Yeah.
And that's your parent who you used to yell at when you were 15. Yeah. And sometimes that just happens again. Yeah. So, and of course now whenever we have, I have much better coping skills in place than I did because that was before my burnout even. That was clearly close to it. But I hadn't quite gone all the way over the ledge. But, now I have coping skills so I can see it coming. I can be like, ooh, I'm starting to get a little snippy. Yeah. Or I'm starting to get a little frustrated at her or even my other, this also happens. It's it's not just your loved one that you're caring for that you get other people. So thank you for saying that.
One thing that I teach my clients is how to learn the language of your body, so that, because there's the trigger and there's this runway, and then there's the explosion of whatever happens after but we get triggered way back here. And if we're not paying attention, like, it shows up in our body first before we even start feeling the irritation. That's even like past the trigger. So it's like figuring out what does the trigger feel like in our body? And this is where that self-work comes in, to be able to listen and to attune. Cause like right now your body's like speaking Spanish and you're speaking English, and like you guys are not jiving together. So when you can really learn that, then you can catch it before it gets to that point. So then you can implement these tools that we're talking about that make it so much easier to care for yourself and to really care for your loved one.
I also love that you talk about breathing, because it is probably my favorite self-care practice.
Yeah.
Partially because as long as we're alive, we're going to have our breath with us. Yeah. So it's an easy tool that we can use. And I love that. I love habit stacking. I'm a big fan of habit science anyway. But I love that you did that. But one of the things, that I have learned, and I wonder if this is something that it kind of sounds like similar to what you did, but one of the things that I work with my clients and in our program, we do like, don't talk about talk about whatever you want, number one, but like, it's not about like, I don't have time. No one's going to give you time. Mm-hmm. So if you're just waiting for like time to get easier, like find the time, or like things are going to slow down. I can do this, and then things are going to get better. That's not reality for a lot of caregiving situations. It's going to get different. It may slow down. It may speed up. It may change altogether. Plus, you're only thinking about that one person, but you also have health that you need to tend to your own health. So something could happen with you, other family members, etc. So time, you're not going to find it. Somebody's not going to give it to you. You're really going to have to make it or take it. Like I use both of those terms. And so for me, one of the things that I did, so it sounds like you had the sticky notes and you were like using time that was already being filled with something else, but you're going to also embrace it for yourself. So I love that. And one of the things that I teach is, okay, let's say you're saying you have no time. There's one thing you do every day to take care of yourself, at least. Do you brush your teeth? Do you take a shower? Do you go to the bathroom? Do you eat food? One of those things. Pick one. I usually do toothbrushing as my example, because it was toothbrushing and then like face washing. That was this is how I did. This is how I incorporated this. I would say if I was brushing my teeth and I had a really busy day and I was going to be, jumping and moving all around, I would say this 2 minutes when my quip goes off, this is all the time I have today. Okay. So I'm going to embrace this 2 minutes. This is my self-care for the day. Right. So I would do that. And then lo and behold, I'm brushing my teeth, and then like, oh, maybe I should do some flossing, which my dentist was thrilled about. Then I'm gargling, I'm like expanding that 2.5 minutes to 5 minutes, because that's the only time I'm going to get. So I'm going to embrace that 5 minutes. And then lo and behold, as I do that throughout the day with like, oh, I'm going to sit down and eat this lunch. Now I'm probably going to eat it faster than I should, but I'm going to enjoy this lunch. Maybe only for 5 minutes, but I'm going to say, this is something I'm doing for myself right now. And just that mindset changing of, instead of trying to find time to do something different than you are doing, acknowledge the things that you are doing to take care of yourself, even if they're not the fun things like, Well, and so that really works for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with the breath thing, that's one of the things that I do too, that we talk about, is if you're breathing, that is an act of self-care. So if you have no other resources available to you in the moment, but you are in need of some care for yourself, take some breaths and tell yourself, I am giving this to myself. This is self-care for me. And I think just those small mindset shifts start the start the ball rolling towards more self-care, finding more, making more time, taking more time, acknowledging what we're already doing. So I really encourage that as well. And then there's one more thing you mentioned emotions and how sometimes, I think especially like in the culture in which I grew up, in the community, there was a certain way that women were, girls were supposed to behave, college girls were supposed to behave, wives were supposed to behave, and there wasn't always room for certain emotions to be expressed.
Yeah.
And so we get, like you said, we get this idea of good feelings and bad feelings. But one of the things I learned in my own recovery from an eating disorder, one of my mentors, also a very good friend, she's still friends with me today. I hope she's listened to this podcast. I hope this makes her smile that I'm sharing this with everyone. But she would say, our feelings can't kill us. They're just feelings. What we do to avoid them, deny them, and hide them or hide from them, that might. And so it's very important to acknowledge, and when I'm doing work inside the cohort, we talk about it's just a feeling. Maybe get curious about it. Like, why am I feeling frustrated right now? It doesn't seem like it's relevant, but it's not about, we don't have to judge it. We can just get curious, become aware of it. And I think that's really helpful in healing as well, is just to try to release the judgment, letting that feeling go. Or, if it's really something that's like, no, I can't seem to let it go, maybe get curious about it. And there's ways to deal with that too. But I just want to throw that in there in honor of my good friend that taught me that. I still remember it to this day. Okay, so we could talk for another 45 minutes, I am sure. But
Absolutely.
Let's go ahead and wrap it up. Erin, I would love for you to share any encouragement or anything that you specifically want to share with our audience, and let them know how they can get in touch with you. If you follow me, you're probably going to, I talk about her often and tag her in posts all the time, but please tell us how we can stay in touch with you and learn more about what you do.
Yeah. So first, before I do that, I would say to you as a caregiver that you're doing a really good job.
Yeah.
And that you are equipped and that the next best step to do for your loved one, and to lean into that trust in yourself, and that no one is as good as what you can do for your loved one in terms of being able to make decisions and figuring that out. I think sometimes we lean into like, well, what should I do? And should I do this? And should I do that? And just know that your loved one the best, and you can advocate for them the best. And you're doing an incredible job if no one has told you today. And so I would love, if you're leaning in and you're like, man, this has been some good stuff. Like, you can find me on all platforms at Next Gen Caregivers, or my name. So Erin Antroinen. And on my Instagram profile, you'll see a link. I have right now a thriving starter kit for caregivers, like teaching you basically those first 4 steps that I went through to get a hold of my anxiety, to get a hold of that, to really move from chaos to peace, from in day to day to thrive. Because it's not only just, I want to help you not only to thrive in caregiving, but how do you thrive in your life? Because caregiving is not everything that you're doing right now. And so, and I just want to thank you, Jeanette, for this conversation. I love that we're both in this space doing this, and the empowerment of teaming up and doing this podcast together means everything, because I think more people need to hear about this. And the more that we can talk about it and get loud about it, the more that people are going to be able to be changed and know that they can have a different experience in caregiving.
Yes, I totally agree. And I'm so appreciative that you took the time to join me today. You guys, I will also link everything in the show notes. And we were talking about like 5 minutes and breath work. It reminded me that I have a resource that I'm also going to be sharing, and I'll share it with you too, Erin. It's called Hit Pause and Press On. So if you're having those days where you need 5 minutes, each one of these guided meditations is just 5 minutes long, and it's perfect for like, I'm in the car, I've got to go to a doctor's appointment, or I need just 5 minutes before I have to go do bath time with my loved one or whatever it is. If you just want 5 minutes, I've got these great little, like I said, there's just 3 of them, although I may add more. But right now that you get 3 guided meditations that walk you through just getting you grounded when the bottom drops out. That's what we do. So I'll have that, and I'll link, Erin, your socials in there as well.
Thank you for joining me today. From Guilt to Good Podcast is a proud member of the Whole Care Podcast Network. To access additional self-care resources that help you feel good, not guilty, and figure out how to contact Erin, check out the show notes or head to theselfcaregiver.com. Subscribe now and join me in going from guilt to good as you rediscover your worth, reclaim your health, and get back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this show, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback really matters, and it helps other caregivers find this podcast. We're redefining self-care for caregivers, one episode at a time. And until next time, remember, you are worthy of the same care you give others.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.